story has been a community that is fully invested in development, but also a community that's actively pursued the housing delivery process. And I think that's the reason why we find ourselves speaking about this. And in fact, even at the time when they came to us as an organization, we knew that this is a case that must find itself in the court, because you have a community that has taken responsibility for their own future. And when we are approached by the Slovo Park Development Forum, they approach us with boxes and boxes of documents. In those boxes of documents, they have minutes of every meeting that they've ever held. They have annual reports from the city of Johannesburg showing the promises that were made about development. They have in their press clippings. And as a community, they themselves held the history of their struggle and in fact delivered to us, say, we want you to compel the city of Johannesburg to develop our informal settlement, because we've already gone through all of this. We've already engaged. In fact, at the time they came to us, they'd been represented before by another legal organization. So they were a community that had continued the struggle despite different hurdles. And at the time when we apply for the application, we bring the application in the beginning of 2014, in January of 2014. And at least for a year, the city of Johannesburg doesn't respond to the substantive application, to the substantive request brought by the community. The city of Johannesburg instead chooses to attack the authority of SERI as legal representatives, to attack the authority of the Slovo Park Community Development Forum as leaders of the community, and in fact attack the voices of community members themselves, because the application wasn't purely brought by leadership, it was brought by the residents of Slovo Park. But eventually, in 2015, when they eventually respond to the application, they have two responses. And the first response they make is that, as the city of Johannesburg, we have made a decision about your future. We have made a decision about how we deliver housing to you. And that decision is to relocate you. Unabo, which is 11 kilometers away, together with other communities. And it's not just simply implied, but what the city says in their response is, as government, we will decide what to do with your life. We will decide if we want to move you 11 kilometers away. And you do not have a voice in that. You simply have to accept that there will be housing at the end of that process. And they also do not hide the fact that the offer is being made to only qualifying beneficiaries. So while they're aware of 10,000 people living in Slovo Park, they say, we'll only move qualifying beneficiaries to 11 kilometers away. Then their second response is that as the community, in order for us to consider you for upgrading, you must prove that upgrading is feasible. And here they are talking about geotechnical studies. They're not simply saying, as the community, you must tell us that you're willing to be upgraded. They're asking the community for the impossible. And it takes a few months before we're actually able to come before a court. And we are allocated to Judge Strauss, and she hears that hears the case in November of 2015. And within a few months, there is a judgment that is delivered, where the court deliberates on these two sides of a coin. A community that has for 20 years followed through, has acted actively to claim their housing rights, and the government on the other side that says, we have taken a decision to move you 11 kilometers away, and again, that will only be for some of you. And the court does something that it should have had to do. It tells the city of Johannesburg that when you are delivering housing, there's only one framework that guides you, and that is the National Housing Act of '97 and the National Housing Code, which is ordered through the Housing Act. And it also says that, unfortunately, that code binds both municipalities and provinces. The city cannot simply decide to opt out of the National Housing Code. And it says that in relation to informal settlement, the primary tool for delivery of housing for informal settlements is the upgrading of informal settlements program. And the beautiful thing about the judgment is that it doesn't end there. I mean, it's a very short judgment, but it goes there to say, how will the community know that this is indeed upgrade? And there are a few principles that the court speaks on in the judgment. Firstly, it says, it underscores that upgrading is about a partnership between the community and local authorities. This is a process where the community voice is at the center and cannot be simply thrown to the side. In fact, the court points out that meaningful engagement is a key and crucial component to housing delivery. So not just in relation to upgrading, but across housing delivery. And it in fact denounces the fact that the city of Johannesburg decided to relocate the community to Univo without even consulting them. So that at each and every stage of the housing delivery process, communities must be consulted. And secondly, what it does, the court then says, but let's talk about, you want here to relocate people. What does the UISP tell you about relocation? So if you're a community who has been told, and we know that there are many communities who have boards that say upgrading off, the only way you're gonna know that your community is being upgraded is if one, the municipality has decided that relocation is the last resort. But two, that relocation has to be decided by principles that are developed by that very same community. Three, if we are talking about relocation, that relocation has to be as close as possible to the informal settlement. But one of the most important things about the UISP, and again the court points and looks at this, is the issue of inclusion. So the court demands, as Section 26 demands, that any reasonable state action would include as many people as possible. So while the UI, what differentiates the UISP from other housing policies is the fact that you are meant to develop for all the residents of the informal settlement, for all the 10,000 people in Slovo Park, for all the 3,700 households that are in Slovo Park. And the very fact that you want to apply a decision that is outside of that means you are not in an upgrade. And I want to say this because we have consulted with many communities who say, we are told that we are being upgraded, but we've been informed that the upgrading is only for 1,000 of the 3,000 households in this informal settlement. Upgrading insists on inclusion. Upgrading insists on relocation being the last resort. But most importantly, upgrading brings the community to the center of the housing delivery process. And I think those are the lessons that we have from the Slovo Park judgment and the decision of Judge Strauss in this case. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Lastly, while Tiffany still has given me time, I'd like to just mention one of the interesting facts about this case, is that at the post-judgment, the court, the city of Johannesburg, appealed the judgment of the Johannesburg High Court. And it was through a process of engagement, again, started by the community, which started first as a march, and then a series of meetings with high-ranking officials in the city of Johannesburg, where the community said, we want you to implement this decision. And it is important for every community to know, one, it has every right to lead and to claim their housing rights. It has every right to demand that, as this court judgment says, they must be upgraded in situ. And thirdly, that they should not give up their power. They should give up the exercise of their own decisions and demand that the municipalities must respect, firstly, must respect the decisions of the community and also ensure that they are part of the process from the beginning to the end.
Thank you, Nomzamo. Lerato, over to you.
Thanks, Tiff. And thanks again to Nomzamo. At times you could think that she's residing in Slovo Park. But one would want to continue as per after the judgment. Immediately after the judgment, government wanted to develop Slovo, but in a sense that in their own way, they wanted to only develop and build only 399 houses, of which, when we looked at it, was an element of saying, no, it means you are still relocating us in a sense that we are more than 399. So we opposed that particular proposal, compelled by the court in saying they must comply by applying to the province. So we opposed the proposal and saying, let us then try and assist you in reformulating the document and start by doing things right in implementing the UISP. So a task team was forced, was then formed after that particular engagement with the province and the city. Of course, with people that are lawyers, of course, of city and SERI, where we then started to reformulate the document. But firstly, we had to make sure that we start by understanding who are these people that we are talking about, which was one, let's do a socio-economic study to understand clear who are we planning for. But in a sense, since the formulation of the tax team, we have got successes and challenges that we have faced. One, maybe one would start with challenges that one faces, or the team is faced with. At most, once there is development or movement towards the right direction, officials happens to be changed from the progress. They are changed or removed to a different department, and somebody new brought in, and that means you would have to start afresh, depending as to whether the individual coming in as the head has got a political will or not. So that on its own destabilizes the movement in trying to unlock the development. But we also realized too that as officials and human beings, there is no practicality of township development. There is no school of practicality in regard to that. The proclamation of township and its development at large, there is no practicality. And UISP on its own becomes a challenge in a sense that even an official might not be in a position to understand it clear and unpack it clear. Hence, the failure to implement told us that we have a challenge of unpacking the actual policy or the act. So we then had to take baby steps in trying to unlock it together in the tax team because of that particular challenge. But one other element was that we also realized in South Africa, we have had for the past 20 years greenfield development as a solution instead of informal settlement upgrading. We used to eradicate informal settlement and move them to a greenfield development, which the idea is to change that as per the judgment. But we struggle, basically officials, to move from a greenfield development to an ASP direction, which is something that we still need to work on. So I'm talking of the challenges that we are faced here. Two is that within South Africa, I don't think we have yet officials that are champions of UISP. That would say he has learned it, he understands it, he can be in a position to implement it, or with all its steps where it can be, purely because of this change of personnel every time when implementation of phases are changing within what we are doing. So even within the tax team on its own, we have had changes of so many people. The first person that was spearheading the project was removed to Mpumalanga, of which at that particular time we thought we are at a very advanced stage in trying to unlock, where now we are saying we are about 3 to almost to 4 years without any action now. Although the judgment was saying, let's have all this in a year, then we'll have an implementation. So we then have a challenge of now is 4 years after the judgment, and leaders like myself are getting old. We are passing on. Life is not standing for us. We have lost already 4 leaders that were spearheading this particular project. May their soul rest in peace. They were playing an integral role in unlocking this particular development on its own. So it tells that the longer we waste time in implementing, we might find ourselves not even getting that particular UISP implemented, because people that kind of understood the direction that wanted to be taken would have passed on all of them, which is a challenge. But all in all, unit tax team is not that we have not yet had successes. We have had successes. The first 6 months or a year of the tax team, we managed to do a socio-economic study, which led to us reformulating the proposal, which was one of the successes that we felt we were giving a certain direction. Although it only took 2 years after the completion of that document for it to be submitted to province. It tells that now there is a challenge somewhere. When you say you are celebrating a document will be submitted in 3 months, you'll get a response, or 6 months thereafter, then you would find that the document is still within the city of Johannesburg. And it's a challenge that we are faced with. So we also had the success of engaging through housing city power to at least as the first priority to have Slovo Park electrified where it is the way it is. And we have had electricity in the settlement for the past 2 years. Although the electricity that we have, we're not enjoying it because we still have 19 households that are said to be closer to power lines that cannot be electrified. So we are not yet home free in regard to that. And we have tried to give numerous options in trying to solve the problem. It's almost 3 years now. Nothing is coming forth. You would tell that there's no political will. So really, the judgment on its own is a good thing, but we need practitioners, we need officials, we need leaders, activists that can put heads together in trying to unlock this particular implementation of the USP. Remember, going to court was our last resort in challenges that we were faced with. We had no other options rather than going to court because of the information that we had. And really, even today, the last element that became now a challenge is the COVID-19. With COVID-19, everything got to a standstill.
Lerato, can I stop you there? Because we're going to talk about exactly that. Are you happy if Marie and Jacqui proceed, and then we'll come back to this in discussion?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Marie, over to you to discuss UISP implementation lessons, and I understand that you'll also be joined by Neil later on. Marie, you're still muted.
There we are. Thanks so much. And I think what Nomzamo and Lerato have shared will resonate in what I'll speak about. This is Neil Klug and my work together. We put our heads together to put these lessons together last night, and I think it's been an incredible privilege being part of this process for over 4 years, as frustrating as it has been. So the question one needs to ask at the start is whether the UISP process in Slovo Park and whether the Slovo Park settlement too unique to learn from. And is Slovo Park successful enough for us to learn from? Those are challenges. So on the uniqueness, yes, there's a strong community organization, which is not a given in every informal settlement. There's pressure from a court case, from a court judgment. That's also not a given. And the harsh reality is that 4 years later, there's still only very partial implementation. Lerato mentioned the electrification. So what can we learn from this? What we thought were really the most important lessons are to do with the conditions that need to be in place for UISP to unfold. And mostly these are not in the program or in the housing code, in the UISP as such, and they are taken for granted, especially when informal settlements are categorized and ranked for their suitability for upgrading. And that is mostly done by outside consultants, and is done purely on the physical and technical suitability for upgrading. And to us, that really misses some of the underlying conditions that are needed. So what are these conditions? On the one hand, in the informal settlement, what is critical is that there is community organization that operates democratically and accountably, that is engaged and responsive and reaches out to residents in the community. That was a given in Slovo Park. And the community needs to have a certain level of resources in order to sustain organization over several years in a way that ensures continuity. And Lerato can explain how they've been able to manage that. You know, there's been one of the business owners in the settlement has really supported the community forum and helped it continue. That person's also passed away. So these are really real challenges. And then advocacy support to the community, I think, is also a critical condition. Then at the level of local government, what conditions are needed for upgrading? And here, a key lesson, and Lerato's already mentioned it, from the Slovo Park case, is we need leadership, and that is political and institutional leadership within local government that understands UISP and wants to see it implemented. We need stability politically and also within the officialdom, and that was Lerato mentioning. This turnaround of officials was really not very helpful. Then we need champions, and this is really a key word out of the Slovo Park. Lerato's already mentioned it. We're very happy that UISP, that NASP, National Upgrading Support Program, has taken this up. Basically, there's a need for champions at the coalface that are individuals that are informed, impassioned, and empowered to lead the upgrading process with a committed team. All relevant municipal departments have to be committed and willing to collaborate. And here, Neil and I really thought it from the Slovo Park experience, it's important to highlight the planning department, which needs to understand its role in relation to SPLUMA, and namely as facilitating upgrading and not primarily as regulating. So the planning department must be able to tackle the strategic question, what needs to be done in order to unlock UISP implementation. That really is critical. The planning department has to be prepared to shift the boundaries, to test innovation, for instance, to use progressive zoning and to incrementally secure tenure. And overall, in the municipality has to be willing to pilot meaningfully, and we can talk in the discussion what piloting means and what would make Slovo Park a meaningful pilot within the municipality to help unlock upgrading at scale. So another condition that is needed, and this is another lesson from Slovo Park, is the planning consultant. The planning consultant has to understand the steps of the UISP, has to understand that desktop layout planning is not appropriate, and has to understand participatory layout planning with every household circumstances in mind, and that requires an in-depth process on the ground. So what we had in Slovo Park was a planning consultant hired by the housing department, rigidly telling the housing department what is and what isn't possible in very conventional terms of planning, and what the processes are for planning approval, the conventional processes. And those were the fixed boundaries in which the consultant was able only to work within. And the planning consultant focused on an individual land parcel to be rezoned and established as a township. Instead, what was needed was a planning department that is directly involved in the project, telling the consultant what its processes are and what its particular needs are. And the planning department needs to lead through a programmatic planning so that upgrading an informal settlement is never just about a parcel of land, because informal settlements straddle several parcels of land. And if partial relocation, or what is now often called de-densification, is necessary, additional land parcels have to be secured. So informal settlement upgrading on the one hand is area-based and it's inclusionary, and that's what Lerato was saying, it has to be for all people in the settlement. However, informal settlement upgrading must be located in a regional plan through which land commitments are made. And then the team of officials have to be able to partner with communities. And that means officials, as well as consultants, have to relinquish power and understand that a community, an organized community, is not a threat. And the planning consultant should not resist a community organization taking the lead. So in an ideal world, all of this is in place, and the hard work can then start, namely grappling with the complexity of the informal settlement and with the complexity of the legislative framework in a responsive manner, in a way that through which there's minimal disruption to people's lives, and in a manner that empowers the community and maintains and builds people's livelihoods. And all of this is required through the UISP and through the Slovo Park judgment. None of that is easy to do. So the reality is, it is seldom the case that we have that ideal world. And that means that officials have to muddle through the messy institutional reality. The champion has to navigate difficult politics and shifting institutional ground. The champion has to renegotiate consensus again and again. And the champion has to catch curveballs and keep them afloat. And in that context, which Slovo Park has been in since April 2016, the following has been critical for this repeated negotiation of consensus. One, the strong, persistent community organization with institutional memory, including all those minutes, I'm almost done, consistent legal support and representation for the community organization, a court judgment that time and again could help refocus, and that could be also just an agreement if there isn't a court judgment, that it's some compact that everyone agrees to. Innovative experts willing to volunteer and experience innovation, and I think Jacqui will share some of that, and a neutral academic sounding board for the champion, but also for the other role players. I think all of those are critical. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Marie. Jacqui, would you like to come in and talk about how we can work around the practicalities of COVID-19 and informal settlement upgrading?
Sure. I'm going to just share my screen quickly. Oh, never mind, I won't. I think Ed might have.
It will.
Sorry?
Ed will be sharing your presentation.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so we've been trying to do some kind of participative planning and trying to engage on how exactly do we do engagement, and how do we do consultation, and how do we do these things in a way that is responsible, that is safe, that is just kind of logical and pragmatic. Anyway, Yeah, anyway, we took some assumptions that that we all have heard and that we've all know from what government has said, what the president has said in his speeches, is that the virus spreads in a certain way. Social distance. We need to have very clear is a completely different thing. So what we did was we just took an internal meeting about what the short, medium, and long-term impacts would be. How do we say hello? How do we say goodbye? Hello, am I still here? Okay, I'm back. And I mean, we have seen so much information on those things already in the media. But what we've done specifically is realize the pragmatic issues on these things. So it's all great that everyone should wear a mask, but if you're doing an engagement with a group of people who don't have any masks, how do you do that? And if you're working in a place where there's no water and no one can wash their hands and there's no sanitizer, what do you do with that? Are we now responsible in the way that we're working to provide everyone with sanitizer and soap and make sure that everyone washes their hands? And how much responsibility falls onto the people engaging and how much responsibility falls onto the people being engaged with? Are we all responsible for ourselves? We had our meeting about these impacts and what this means in terms of spatial planning and things, and we hypothesized a whole bunch of stuff, some of which has been real, some of which hasn't. Can we skip to slide 7, please? So then what we did was we worked out a plan of like, if we just give people masks, then at least the people we're engaging with have masks, and then we're protecting ourselves as well as protecting each other. If we maintain a social distance, we have to follow the rules so that everyone we work with can also follow the rules. And then if you skip to the next slide, the Slovo youth did a really great project, which was a small hand wash station, which has probably been our most successful COVID engagement. And the Slovo Youth Organization with Dean at the helm organized this hand wash station for where the mobile clinic parks. We managed to facilitate and arrange and manage and finance this entire project through WhatsApp and e-wallet. The youth organized the proposal, sent it to us by WhatsApp. We managed to e-wallet the finances. They managed to report back every cent of spending through WhatsApp. It was probably the most remote project we've ever managed to be a part of, which I think was really great as an example and as a test. And people can then wash their hands at the clinic. And then, we just are assuming the COVID attitude of if we have it, if we act like we have it, then we keep everybody safe. So we can't have big workshops. We can't have public meetings. We can't have focus groups of more than 50 people. We should have our meetings outside. We should have our engagements outside. And we've also tested a few things. If you go to slide 10. We tried by sharing information. We tried putting up notice boards in some of the areas where we're working. The notice boards didn't last longer than 4 days, so that doesn't work. And then we've just taken into consideration things that we think might assist in being safe, and that's doing small groups of engagements. Skip the slide. We're laminating our drawings and papers so that we can wipe them down with alcohol-based sanitizer in between engagements. This we're hoping will keep everybody safe. These two people live together, so it's okay that they breathe on each other and don't have masks on. You skip the slide. Yeah, and then okay, this isn't quite, there's an update, but anyway. We've been talking about sharing information in digital platforms. What COVID has done is it's brought a lot of social movements and organizations together. Socio-Economic campaign has been quite incredible in collecting data and collaborating between all sorts of different NGOs and groups, and putting all of our information together in a digital platform and sharing it. There's other digital platforms that we've been using. There's WhatsApp, there's Facebook, there's Twitter. And the thing that it's done is brought up more questions than it has answered. Can we do participation over WhatsApp? Is a WhatsApp group good enough? Is Facebook Messenger a better platform because the data it's data free? Do the people we're engaging with have access to the smart devices? The same questions that the schools are asking about education over Zoom, over WhatsApp, over Microsoft Teams are the same questions that we're asking about engagement. And is digital engagement valuable enough? These questions come up over and over again. How do you build trust, and how do you build relationships, and how do you build engagements going forward in a digital platform where you're not face to face, where you're not dealing with people in real time and in real space? One of the things that we learn over and over again about engagement is how important it is to meet with people and to eat together and to talk together and to have tea breaks, and none of those things can be done. Which is quite challenging. And I think one of the other things that's been quite difficult is a lot of things have just stopped and been redirected, and processes that were happening inside government, inside departments, inside the city have been disrupted by this process. And this disruption is frustrating for everyone. It's disrupted in terms of UISP, it's disrupted in terms of the normal progression of service delivery. And there could be other options and other access to service delivery because of the emergency, but it's been very, very difficult to navigate. And I think across the board, we're just trying to do things. I don't think that we have an answer. I think all we can really say is that we're trying to follow a best practice. These are all attempts. Nobody knows how to participation in a pandemic, but we're trying. Any sort of input and assistance is always going to be greatly accepted. A how-to guide would be awesome. I don't know if that could exist. We're trying things around data, we're trying things around digital platforms, we're trying things around building digital models of the settlements. What I did want to share was our next steps going forward. It's not in this presentation, but what we are trying to do is map things as distance positive as we can, with as much community engagement as far apart as possible. And those two things are obviously at odds with each other. There's a direct opposition in engagement and social distance. So yeah, I think in conclusion, all I can say is be safe. We'll see you as much as we can. Yeah. We're learning and we're experimenting, and yeah, that's kind of it.
Thank you, Jacqui. All right, so all of our panelists have presented. If anyone from our audience has questions or comments, please utilize the Q&A box. But already I'll kick us off with something that has come up, and it's the question of relocation. And I think we should be considering relocation / de-densification and what that could mean and the implications that has on informal settlements that want to be upgraded. Marie, Neil, and Lerato, can we start off with Neil? Could you take us through why part of upgrading an informal settlement in situ does involve additional land parcels, and how can we establish a best practice or a better kind of practice around relocating households for the purpose of de-densification in a way that doesn't perpetuate forced displacement and eviction? Neil, are you there?
Okay. Here we go. Am I there?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So basically it lies within the initial layout planning. which has got to be done in partnership with the community, so that the community are fully aware of the whole process, and that every single site laid out in an informal settlement should be in negotiation and in discussion with the community and with the community leadership. And based on that, the community then decide which members can be relocated or wish to be relocated. And it's a negotiation process. They will come to a point where they accept how many people need to be relocated for the purposes of putting in new roads, infrastructure, water, sanitation. So in very dense settlements, there's always a degree of de-densification in order to put in services, in order to, in some cases, to put in open spaces and community facilities. But if the community are fully aware of what these requirements are and are a part of the negotiation process, an agreement is arrived at which community members would be relocated. And so the relocation process should ideally go a lot smoother.
Thank you. Marie, do you have anything to add to what Neil has said?
I could add that in that process, really, and I think it's important given the current discourse, that one needs to avoid making use of temporary relocation areas. And if that process of planning the upgrading is done in a programmatic way, land parcels should be identified, committed, and made available in a timing that allows people to settle permanently as they get relocated. And the resistance for individual households to be disrupted is less if they know that wherever they get moved to, they can take root, they can start investing in their own housing, they can start investing in their lives, basically, rather than being suspended, being lifted out of the informal settlement into suspension in a TRA with, as we know from our track record in this country, an indefinite period that they will be living there, with a floating promise of receiving a house once more. And the Slovo Park Community Development Forum has resisted that as well, and is trying to ensure that if relocation happens, that it should be onto serviced land that is there in permanence for those households. And I think that's a very, very important aspect.
Great, thank you. Lerato, would you like to come in and perhaps comment on what does it mean to build and create networks of champions? I'll also let Marie give an answer to this because it was directed at her, but I think it's important that a community-based perspective comes in on this. What are the practicalities around building relationships with local government officials that feel quite meaningful and that move your settlement towards the kind of development that you would like?
Thanks, Steph. I think it's very important for a relationship to exist between officials and communities. But the challenge that we have within the municipality is that I don't know whether it's people feel threatened in power or what. Once a junior official gets closer to understanding community and their needs and trying to be in that particular community's shoes in advocating issues, that particular individual will be victimized or removed, for that matter, from that particular department. And hence, I'm saying we need champions of projects like this. People that will be given a go-ahead to learn and implement without hassle or somebody still calling shots at the back. Being dictated only by a document or a policy, for that matter. that will assist, because people are bringing in politics into development of individuals, because we regard structural development as part of individual developing. So it's very difficult for one to engage official directly and try and forge a relationship. Hence, at Slovo Park, we even pushed to try and engage with people like Mari, the one to want to try and set a standard in saying this is possible. There can be engagement between people that comes from different backgrounds, be different geographical spread, as long as we are meeting for one particular purpose, which is to implement a certain policy. And we need to emphasize that more onto officials. But I want to believe that with NASP coming up with the issue of champions, things might change a bit, in a sense that the issue of power struggle, it's a very dangerous thing within the cities or spheres of government, for that matter, of who tells who what and who calls shots where, who's got powers over who. So my take is very important, but it's difficult to forge. Although as community we are trying, because outside the court order, the judgment on its own, we are still even today trying to forge a relationship with officials and spheres of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Lerato. There is a very specific question about your willingness to get involved with the South African Cities Network Built Environment Integration Task Team. So just check the Q&A box and perhaps you can respond to that individually. Jacqui, I'd like to also bring you in on very practically creating networks with champions at a local government level. And then I'd like to then go back to Lerato to answer the question about tensions internally within a settlement. But before that, I think it would be really helpful as a built environment practitioner who's on the ground. What has been your experience in trying to create these networks with progressive officials?
That's quite a question. I mean, my experience in this is that we find really, really, really great officials. There are really great officials who are very keen and very excited to be champions in these places. And like Lerato has mentioned, they're there for a while and then they get reshuffled. And it's endlessly frustrating to need to build new relationships every 3 to 6 months when the housing officials get moved around. The other frustration that we have is that we might have a good relationship with one practitioner at, say, national level, and then another practitioner or another official at provincial level, and another one at the city level. But those 3 people generally don't have an opportunity to speak to each other. And I think that's been one of the biggest frustrations, is that national has one agenda and province has another agenda and the city has another agenda. And I probably shouldn't say that on a recorded platform, but that really does seem to be an issue, is the silos of things. And hopefully that will break down. And I think that the COVID pandemic has broken some of those barriers. So we can only be hopeful that communication is happening between those different silos and those different groups and the different organizations, that we can find all the incredible officials that there are and have them working in the same place for the same goal.
Thank you. Nomzamo, do you have anything you want to comment on that in particular? Because I know that you also have a lot of experience engaging government, and then we'll go back to Lerato.
Sure. I think the one thing that has come up, and I think in the last few years, because we've seen a lot of changes in the political landscape in Johannesburg, has been how important it is to maintain the relationships with officials. but also to understand that at times, even if there is a shift politically, the history must be held institutionally, and the importance of always making sure that you remain connected to the officials who've worked on the issues historically. But also, one of the challenges that I think we've seen is the failure to manage information in municipalities, and how important it is to always provide that backup of, this is how far we've come, and this is why this next step is important. Understanding that at times, even if the political leaders are against you, if the official dom agrees, there might be some of victories that come from that.
Thank you. Lerato, there's a question specifically about tensions in the community between South Africans and foreign nationals. And have these come up? Firstly, if they have they been resolved during an upgrading process?
Thank you.
Lerato, can you use your video? Can you just enable your video so everyone can see you?
Oh, my video is not on. Okay. Is it on now? All right. I think one is that in Slovo we resoluted in having a community, irrespective of nationality. Because before becoming anything, we are neighbors, and we have not had, since, let alone be it xenophobia or anything in Slovo Park, we have said no to that, because we understand that we are a community of Slovo Park. So when it comes to development, we are still tackling these issues as a community. And we have taken a resolution that we are not home affairs, we are not guidelines of housing. We are individuals that are neighbors residing in Slovo Park. Laws and acts would act as and when they are brought in. But from us as a community, we are one united force, and we are not going to see each other as a South African or a Zimbabwean or a Mozambican or a Lesotho national. In a sense that whatever that we are fighting for is one. And we have been residing there together for 20 years. So we are serving the community of Slovo Park, irrespective of nationality. Hence, even when we did socio-economic study, they were also part of the people that were studied. The role of government will play for whatever going forward, but as from where we are as a community and leadership, we are one element, we are one team. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we are running a few minutes over. I'd like to allow our panelists to respond to the last few questions as closing remarks. The one question really is about, are we as a country really committed to the UISP? Is de-identification just being used as a politically correct phrasing for forced evictions? Or is the UISP considered inferior to other policy frameworks that exist? So that's something for you to consider in your closing. And then, Lerato, when you close, can you also just speak a little bit to how you've been able to manage that number of households within Slovo Park to ensure that there isn't rapid growth and expansion? So I'd like to invite Nomzamo first, just for any closing remarks and reflections, and specifically considering commitment to the UISP and informal settlement upgrading in situ going forward. Please enable your video, Nomzamo.
So it's not allowing me to enable the video. Maybe Ed can help me, but I'll start in the meantime. I think one of the things that's very interesting about So about the UISPs, how national government has failed to monitor the implementation of the UISP. I think we have to accept that, at least in the eyes of all of national, provincial, and local, it is seen as inferior. But I think what we do know is that it is the most superior, because it's the one that aligns the most with the principles that are in the Housing Act. It is the one that puts people at the center. I think that's what the story of Slovo Park tells us, that we have a policy here that takes us back to the initial promises that we made to ourselves, that would allow communities to have a voice in their own development. We have a policy here that will allow us to ensure that the little that we'll have is supplemented, that instead of taking an approach that uproots, that destroys, that instead we pull together and say whatever communities, whatever resources communities will be able to pull for themselves, we supplement them through the upgrading process. Tiff, I'll just give, there was one question that was directed to me, which is about Cuyler Shaft. I just want to respond. I think one of the key lessons for me, I think, in Slovo Park and Cuyler Shaft is the importance of community leadership, and specifically a community that acts together. And I think because in both cases, there was an attack on the leadership and an attack on the goals that had been set by the community. And I think the difference lies in how the different communities responded to that. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much. Marie, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks so much. So these are great questions, and I must say I enjoyed the Q&R with really deep questions there. Just to say that I think the national context is part of what any upgrading champion has to muddle through. And there, I think at the national level, it's very important that we do have legal commitment nationally. So the housing code stands in as law. We have the Treasury being very committed and making funding available. We have perhaps very ambivalent political commitment, and it was evident in the minister's budget vote speech. She's more passionate at the moment about TRAs and about getting the economy going through new housing delivery. She said very little about upgrading, but it was included in the budget, and I think that's what we have to hold on to. So I think it's also about the sector strengthening as a network and pressurizing for the implementation, and that includes community organizations and community organization networks pressuring for it as well. And Rihanna Musaji asked a great question about champions and whether there is a network of champions. National Upgrading Support Program, I think, is trying to start that kind of work. But I loved Lerato's initial words about, there isn't an academy of pragmatism. There isn't really a school where you can learn how to do that. And yes, maybe as an institution like CUBES, we should be playing a bit of a role there. We'd love to reach out to more of these champions. We know one, he tried to study this year, he had to drop his studies again because of the pressures of being drawn into other projects. And so yes, I think we could make a contribution on that front. But municipalities have to recognize themselves that they need to nurture champions. It can't be done from the outside and without support really from within municipalities. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. Jacqui, would you like to come in? And perhaps just responding a little bit more directly to whether de-densification is a politically correct phrasing for forced evictions. Jacqui? You're muted.
Yeah, sorry, it's me. I lost you there for a second. What was the question?
Oh, so it's your reflection on the commitment to the UISP, but perhaps you could also respond more directly to whether de-densification for you is a politically correct phrase for forced evictions.
Sure. I don't want to own that as a response, but I would worry about it. I would be very concerned about it. It's definitely a question. There's a lot of talk about terminology, de-densification, reblocking, UISP, removals, forced evictions. These words maybe mean things in academic spaces, but what does it mean when you're actually on the ground? What does that mean when it's your house that is blocked / de-densified / how these things are implemented is going to be the way that we measure that. And exactly how those decisions are made, and whether there's enough engagement on the ground, and whether there's enough community buy-in, and how the decisions are made as to who moves and who doesn't move. I think we'll only be able to see it as it rolls out, and if we can, on the ground as activists and as NGOs and as community leaders and as support organizations, try and keep it towards participative engagement of relocation or of de-densification or reblocking rather than of eviction. I think it's a heavy load for us to carry, but I think that it's our responsibility as support organizations.
Thank you so much. Lerato, I'd like to end with you. In your opinion, the government's commitment to implementing the UISP, but then there's also quite a specific question about how Slovo Park has been able to manage its population size.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kev. I think there are officials that are willing to implement, but hence I said that the powers that be, those that have a willingness and political will to implement, would have at most be moved around from one department to the other. You need to have a stable direction in trying to unlock this, because it's not a challenge of the city, it's a challenge of citizens of South Africa, whether residing in informal settlement or being an official, that we must deal with. These individuals also play an integral role in the economy of this particular country, either how. So we still believe, because the government is ours, we are the government. We believe that where there is a will, there is a way. We can get there. But getting to the direct question, I would want to, you see, at most, I ask myself, what is an informal settlement? The terminology on its own. Is the person residing in a flat elsewhere renting? Is that person in a formal settlement? What is formality? Is it land ownership that belongs to you? Or is it you residing in a place that you don't own, in a sense of informal? So when one says informal settlements are a moving target, I'm asking myself as to where does people residing in informal settlement come from? Except us that are 30 years and younger that were born in, those that are born in informal settlement. All these people come from households, formal households, either renting or residing from one's home, but challenges of life brought them where they are. And on its own, it tells that informal settlement are not something that we can say we are eradicating or a moving target for that matter. If you could deal with this informality thoroughly, would find a solution. But coming to Slovo Park, I wanted to deal with the terminology first. But coming to Slovo Park is that we knew that once there is development, even those that are residing in their parents' house in Soweto or any other place would want to benefit, to have ownership of land, and they will start to move in. So we then said we need to lock the development, in a sense that once you do a socio-economic study, we then did what we call a pilot project of our own, where we were doing a cut system, where we recording all members that were beneficiary or that were counted within the socio-economic stack as beneficiaries of the development of the zone, which were 3,734 households that were counted. Whoever comes in afterwards becomes a baby of whoever brought him in, does not basically destabilize the process. But in a sense, we also have what we call block committees. As I said, Slovo Park is structured in a different manner because leadership of Slovo Park is about 180 people. There are structures, each structure has got a role to play. And there are block committees that would specifically deal with the influx at most of people coming in, or movement for that matter, from one year to the other, in a sense that we are trying to lock development for actual implementation. We are not saying we have failed. We are still trying to win the battle. In that sense, I thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're 12 minutes over, but I think the conversation and the quality of discussion was worth it. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our participants. Thank you to the behind the scenes people. And please, stay up to date with SERI on social media or our website to see what other seminars and webinars are available for the public. Goodbye, everyone.